It says prepare. Here we go. All righty. So
Nice.
welcome to Solid Ground live stream, April 24th, 2023. Some faces are different. Can you figure out which ones? Jody has turned into Deborah. David has turned into Benjamin. It's crazy. It's just last week transhumanism. Now it's like Star Trek.
It's red pilling.
So thank you guys for being here and for joining us for a chat. And we were talking about well, first of all, does anybody have the blurb about Solid Ground? Jennifer, do you happen to have that, or do you want to make it up on the fly? You want to take David's place and do it in your best British accent?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I don't have it.
So what is Solid Ground in your own words, Jennifer?
It's a fabulous group of dissidents, and we offer peer support to people that are concerned about the impact that critical social justice is having on their lives, and also the COVID mandates. And let's see, I'm trying to think of it's solidgroundsupport.com, right? Or solidgroundsupport.com, and you can join locals, and then you can join our groups for just $5 a month. And then our little disclaimer is nothing that we do constitutes psychotherapy or legal advice and should not be construed as such.
That sounds very David-like.
That's as good as I can do.
Very good.
That part's very important.
As such. And so we usually have something that we're going to kind of riff off of or talk about. And Jennifer, do you want to introduce the topic for today? I don't remember exactly what we were talking about.
I think we had decided that we were going to talk a bit about how to help people to leave the cult of wokeness, or just even how to have conversations that maybe plant some seeds and open people's minds to a different way of looking at things.
Yes, that's right. And this came up in my Solid Ground group last week, where there was some discussion about, is it worth it? Do we try to communicate to people who are really indoctrinated, or do we just leave that off to the side and communicate amongst each other? And how do we handle that? Because it really is like a cult indoctrination. And so what do you guys think? What are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, what are the outlines of this thing called wokeness? Just to do a little term defining.
Well, that's a good question. What do you think?
Well, there's I'm sure that there's different components to it. So we know that it is how do we talk about this? I don't know your audience. So we could go like kind of high or low. We can talk about the psychology, or we can talk about the institutional structure of it, or we can talk about the history, but the history is the history. You can find that anywhere. But if we want to talk about what's happening in the moment, then we talk about the way that it's affecting individuals and the way that it's affecting institutions. And if an individual is in an institution that is promulgating these certain values, which would be loosely construed as woke, which would probably be a hyper awareness of race, sex, and other identity characteristics, and then an enforced kind of reversal of norms towards inclusivity, diversity, and equity. Then how is that individual to resist that, or how is that individual to become aware of that and then start to question it? And then what can they do inside or outside to either resist or to make their lives free from being impinged upon by this moral code that they disagree with?
Yes, I think all of that sounds like a reasonable platform from which to start. And I think, like, having been in graduate school with people who were buying this stuff and gobbling it up, and coming out and making videos about the process and about what I was observing and what my concerns were, I had questions about who my audience really was. And the person I pictured my audience being is somebody like my dad. I always picture my dad. He's just not aware of it, really, not in it, outside of it, kind of thinks that it's really peripheral to his life, isn't aware of the ideology kind of encroaching upon our institutions and into our educational system, because he doesn't have little kids and he's not in school anymore and he's not being exposed to that. And so there's a tendency to sort of dismiss it and not think that it's as serious a threat as it is. And so I wanted to really come out and talk to people who maybe weren't aware that this was happening on the scale that it's happening, and weren't aware of how threatening it is to Western culture at large, to what we understand as normal. And so those people, there's a receptivity, perhaps there's a way to talk to people, because they're not part of the cult, but they're also not anti the cult. They're not dug in on either side. And so the question came up the other day in the group, whether it's worth trying to communicate to people who are deeply in it. So you think of like the TRAs, and you think of people who are writing off their family members because they're not woke enough, because they're TERFs, or they're white supremacists based on the woke ideology. And is there a point at which somebody is no longer reachable? And is there something that we still do in order to try to reach, or do we just leave those people to figure their life trajectory out for themselves, and we go about our business and build something parallel? And I guess those are all very clumsy, clunky ways to talk about it, but that's kind of the mental picture I have. And what do you guys think?
I think it might be different. This is, well, I won't mention people in our group at all, but I think some of us have been so really burned by wokeness or whatever. There's just a thing of like, no fucking way, right? There's just, that's not happening. Like it just hurts. Like it's so bad. And like those people were so crazy. Like and I was even trying. Like I'm thinking of some particular, like I was trying, I was actually, so I'm not doing it. I think there's other people, I seem to be more of one of those, like I kind of like to go towards that, which is really different, or really different thinking. Or I sometimes wonder, would I have been a reporter in a war zone? It's a little bit interesting, right? Even then it's still a little scary, but I think you have people constitutionally who might go, this is an interesting project, right? But maybe be detached about it. It's like, this might not really go well at all, but I want to experiment. So I don't really think everyone should be trying to do that. I think of people like Daryl Davis, who went and like ended up converting like 200 Klan members, giving up their robes to him. He's a Black man. But he's a very, like who he is not necessarily copyable in any particular way, right? There's something about him. And there was something about him that drew these initial Klan members in. He was playing jazz piano, and they were had no idea a Black man could play jazz so well. In any event. And so like something came, they wanted to go towards him. They were intrigued. He didn't go out knocking on doors either. Right. So I don't know. I just think there's probably different people would be drawn to do that or not do that. And then we could say, what do you do when that's the case, if you are drawn to do it, and how successful is that? I don't know. That's my thought about it, because I really think it's not for everybody by any means.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, there's going to be, like you say, some people are really maxed out with this stuff, or have had some bad experiences and are just done. But then there's other people who have like a family member that they can't kind of get away from being able to talk about this, because it's coming up in their really intimate relationships, in their personal spaces. And then there's others who I have friends who have an appetite for talking about this stuff online, who still have Facebook accounts and want to get in there and have those kind of back and forth debates and arguments and stuff, and really feel like they're planting seeds there, or having some good, I don't know, doing some good by having those conversations in those places. And I've long since abandoned that kind of thing. So I have no interest in that. So I know it's going to be individual, but is there getting through to people at this point, or is there not? And is that an arrogant thing to say in the first place, to think that you can get through to somebody? Because that says like, I possess knowledge that you don't possess, and I possess the truth and you don't. And so that whole framework feels a little bit, I don't know, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it.
Is there an example in either or any of your lives where you have planted or watched doubt erode somebody's faith in this over the course of time, or even in a moment?
Jennifer, you look really thoughtful. Do you have something that comes up?
I'm thinking, in my own marriage, my husband was certainly never woke by any stretch of the imagination, but there was certain, like most people that I know, sort of grew up in a highly educated liberal household and had a lot of sort of received opinions. I certainly did myself. And there were certain things that he didn't necessarily question, and that he became open to looking at just from our conversations, and me telling him more, just more about what I was learning, not even in a sense of me trying to change his opinion. Like he's also a psychotherapist, and he hadn't really, for example, looked that deeply into the phenomenon of, teenagers transitioning. And so he was sort of taking that at face value. And when I started talking to him about people having regret afterwards and the negative impact of that, and also the negative impact of puberty blockers and the hormones and the surgeries, he really became extremely concerned about it and sees things much, much differently. And that was just really just sharing facts and sharing stories that I was reading about people that had been through that process and the impacts that it had on their physical and mental health. And to me, it was just, I wasn't trying to convince him. I was just, sharing information like, oh my gosh, I just read this article and here's what happened to this person who had the surgery. And I think sharing facts and kind of letting people make up their own minds is useful, because that way you're not kind of taking it as I have this, I know that I have the correct opinion, but you're sharing facts that another person might not have encountered.
And you're doing it through relationship, not through, I guess, argument, more dialectical, ideological therapy rather than some sort of argument.
Yeah. And I always appreciate that. If there's something that I don't know about and I'm holding an opinion based on loose impressions, which probably a lot of our opinions are formulated that way. We get a sense of things and form an opinion. But sometimes you can encounter facts that really make you look at it through a different lens, and it can really open up your perspective.
I have two, not examples, my personal examples, but there's this guy I mentioned in our chat, Leslie, about Ryan Nakata. I discovered a couple of days ago, and he's done, talking with like people in Antifa or QAnon and trying to understand that. And he does a practice, he calls it titanium manning. So instead of just steel manning someone's argument, so part of it is going completely into the other person's world and way of thinking, like not even beginning with I'm going to change your mind or you are off or something like that. Like get so in there, and not only really knowing their argument so well, you know it better than they do. And you can reflect it back, and you can even do it at a higher level with maybe there's some things like they're looking at the world and putting it together with this narrative, but you can kind of go to a higher level, include a bit of what they're about, but maybe give it a better frame or a thing that's actually more acceptable to us or whatever like that. Yeah. And so you're embracing them, but you're actually coming at a higher level of complexity. He didn't do it in practice or when I saw him speaking, but I was like, that sounds really interesting. And then there's often people can move out of the rigidity they're in, because they maybe can even understand their point better in a way that's like not really objectionable to us. And I'm also thinking, like what you're saying, Jennifer and Benjamin, with the relational part, I'm thinking of Dia Khan, who did this movie White Right, and she went and interviewed neo-Nazis. She had been she from Norway, but she was Muslim, and she had to leave her country because she had been being so attacked by the right there. And she eventually decided, I want to understand people on the right. And so she went and started to interview them and film them. And over time, a number of these men fell in love with her Like they're like, I don't know why you're being so kind to me. You're like, I don't have friends and you're being like a friend to me. And so a number of them left, and she wasn't, over time, they're like, I don't know if I could be mean to somebody like you. Like, I haven't even met somebody like you. And so that's sort of the being human and relatable. And she wasn't trying to talk them out of it. There are times, like one guy, she went with him in his truck, and he was throwing like material on people's yards that was pretty hostile and whatever. And she kind of looked at him like, really? But she didn't do tisk 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 either. But at that point, she just like listened to them and got their stories and all of that. So, but again, that takes a person who has some degree of interest in people's stories and can get past their disdain, perhaps, of the point of view.
So it's not a knee jerk, like asked and answered. I've already decided what I think. It's an openness that she's kind of embodying there, where she's not judging too harshly.
Yeah, and she's saying things like she read to some of them after a certain point, like really nasty things people have written about her on Twitter. Like when so she goes, what do you think? People call me this. And she listed lots of, slurs. Like, she goes, what do you think? What's that like, knowing some people call me that, and, a lot of times they'd be like, oh, really? Like, oh, and, so like it was very it wasn't shaming. And it was being relational and curious. And it was, she went in March, she got permission to march when there was the march on Charlottesville, to go and embed with them and film. And she was actually pregnant during the time, and she didn't want anyone to know she was pregnant. It was like very dangerous, actually, like what she was doing. So she's, one of these people who will do potentially, crazy things to really get down into a matter.
What's her name again?
Dia Khan. And you can find White Right is the film. You can find it online. Dia, Deeyah, Khan, Khan.
And
she's another one of my fans.
You bring up something important, Deborah, about like there was just a little clue there where once she got to know these white supremacists or whatever they are, she realized that there's a psychological condition that preceded the ideological condition. So you said the word loneliness. So there's a lot of people who are lonely who end up enacting their loneliness. And we do know that with groups like Antifa or the Proud Boys, it is facilitating a sense of embeddedness or meaning, so-called, in people's lives. And there's something inherent within woke ideology or late-stage progressivism that gives you a transcendental purpose. It flings you out of your measly little atomic individual personhood into history. You are now enacting the Ubermensch of bringing progress forward. That's such a powerful narrative to be embedded in. And I don't know if the only antidote to that is to have a human-sized sense of meaning. Like we're my friends, my family. I'm obligated to the people around me, and then eventually I don't know how far it goes. Like, are you a citizen of the world? I don't think that necessarily works. I know that there's problems with nationalism, but I certainly do know that family is a great way through which we learn about our true authenticity, our true capacities, and true value comes from that. And the political ideology is a substitute for family. And you see that a lot with the way that these groups behave. When they do act out, they behave in unison, they behave like a mob, and it's really difficult to see if there's any individual. There's this great picture from the 2020 celebration of racial reckoning, or whatever you want to call it, where a bunch of kids or youth surrounded this woman in this outdoor patio, and they're all raising their fists, and she's not raising her fist. And I believe she was saying, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm not going to do what you tell me to do just because you're telling me to do it. But they were no longer acting as individuals, and they were trying to get her to not be an individual either. So I don't think you can tame a mob, but when you remove the person from the mob and you humanize them, and then you begin to enact values that are different than this historical, all-consuming, progressive telos, then you get to start to see the more human sides of them. And then you can start to see different, you can maybe plant doubts. So I'm kind of responding a little bit to Jennifer, because facts don't always work. I mean, you can present people with tons of facts. We saw that with the COVID-19 stuff. Like, everybody had 20 papers that supported whatever the position that they had, right? So it's not just about facts, it's about kind of untying people from that certainty of belief.
I think those are such really good points. And one of the things that I noticed with Jennifer's story is her husband had a level of openness still to her. They still had an open, like almost like he was open to hearing. He wasn't dug in on one side or the other. And so by continuing to have a dialogue that he was open to, he received information easily and progressed through his thought process around it to something that was similar to where Jennifer was coming from. And when you have people who are, as you point out, Benjamin, it is a replacement for real connection, and for some of this draw into this ideology, it gives people sort of a heroic narrative that they can be a part of, and also an acceptance of others. I mean, there's a warm embrace by your fellow ideologues. You have a community, you have people who are going to applaud you and get alongside you. And I think we're missing that in this fractured, internet-driven world we live in, and especially in the last few years when people were driven into their homes and even further away from real connection with other people. And to add to that, the ideological narrative that they're gobbling up has bits of truth in it. It's just oversimplified truth. And so it's something that we can all sink our teeth into, and we can say yes if we're thinking about it on the surface. And what I think is, if you have someone in your life that's really buying into this, especially a young person or a teenager that you care about, and it's really contentious on this front, it's and this kind of ties in with what you were just saying. It's important to establish other sorts of connection and reconnect to things that you share that don't have anything to do with this. It's the real life stuff, because life is about so much more than arguing about these differences of race or gender or sexuality or whatever. It's about so much more, and you can still share interests that don't have anything to do with this. And that sounds like what the woman you were describing, Deborah, was kind of doing with these people. She was humanizing the experience of knowing one another and making it about something that wasn't us versus them.
And also, I think, I'm just trying to remember, I've watched it a few times, but she's interviewing them, just asking them about their lives. I think these people, no one ever asked them anything about themselves, as people, even, like, I think they were getting her attention, like undivided attention, for, without having this negative regard. I think they know well enough that people disdain, there's white supremacy, I think they're not clueless about that. Right. And so I think somebody that was just even sitting, and then of course this beautiful woman, right, like, who's very just beautifully spoken and all of that. I mean, I just imagine, I have to say there had to be a factor in that of just the I don't want to say sexual dynamics, but just male, female, and I think if a man had, I think it would have been a bit different. There's something about being, I don't want to say welcomed, but seen. By the opposite sex or something like that. I'm imagining made it a little more catalytic. I can't prove it, but I have a hypothesis.
Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think, Jennifer?
You guys want to know my thoughts?
Yes.
Open.
I'm just thinking about how much people have really got their sense of belonging and meaning from, groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And there was that one person I remember who was interviewed during the pandemic, and they were going out a lot, protesting and probably rioting a bit at night. And they said that for them, it was like going to church. And I think that we've really lost transcendent meaning overall as a culture, something that transcends the self. And I think that that it's being, replaced by this ideology. And I get that. And I'm not saying all transcendent experience has to be through an organized religion. I mean, most people have probably had a transcendent experience at a concert, but it strikes me that that human urge for belonging and meaning is a very, very wonderful thing. And it can also become something that has negative results. And I was just sitting here thinking, God, how can I avoid that in my own life? Like, how do you know you're not one of the people that's creating something negative that's bad overall for society?
I think it was Lisa Marciano, who's a Jungian analytic psychoanalytic psycho. Well, I don't know which one they are, but she's a Jungian. Great book called Motherhood, which is about motherhood. But I asked her that question because we're talking about the ROGD, or rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Basically, this huge uptick in girls identifying as boys. And we got into the ideological side of that. And I asked her, well, how do you know? Because we all have ideology. It's really stupid to say, I am free of ideology, because the man who doesn't believe in something believes in anything. To quote a Christian author, I think it was G.K. Chesterton, yeah. And she said, one of the ways that you can tell that you're on the right path is that the world gets more broad. You get more broad and there's more connection. And I think it's really telling that cancel culture, the echo chamber effect of cancel culture, is about limiting the world, cutting off connection, going away, isolating, and then reemerging on the other side of that isolation in this so-called community. But every immediate relationship is swapped out for this, this ideological relationship, or this consensual relationship where I decided that I'm trans. I didn't decide to be born, but I can decide to become a woman. I can decide to become a man. But and you see that in the transgender thing, that really, that cutting off from nature, from God, that really deep despisal of manhood and womanhood, that I think is being reflected from the culture. These kids that are swept up in it, they're absorbing this from the culture, and then they're just recycling it through themselves. So some sort of ideology that causes connection, that widens your worldview, that gives you a sense of, I guess, a decrease in anxiety and depression, and an increase of availability of grace and beauty and relaxation. Like, you can hear it in the tone of people's voice. And you also see that last point. You also see that in the social justice ideology, where everything has to be urgent. We have to save the world right now. We have to do this right now. We have to, these people are dying. There's a huge genocide left, right, and center. We have to solve this right now, which just, it disconnects you from your intuitive internal self, and then from sharing intuitive, authentic connection with other people.
I think I'd add to that, just being able to, if you're being able to handle more complexity, because so much of what we see in these movements are, this black, white, cookie cutter type of thinking. So if you find yourself actually being able to handle more nuance, more complexity, that would probably be a good sign.
So just speaking as a writer, or somebody who tried to write for a really long time, like, the goal is to be as simple as possible, or as straightforward as possible. And so there's just a tension here. There's just some sort of ironic tension here, where you see where these ideas are coming from. The academy, the verbiage is just so complex. It doesn't even mean anything, right? There's an over stimulus of complexity that then, once it trickles down into action, becomes super simplistic statements, right? So it's not just black or white complexity or simplicity. There is a proper simplicity and clarity, and then there's a proper way to handle ambiguity, nuance, without getting lost in it, because it's really easy to get lost in that stuff too.
I have an eye on the chat, and I want to say hi to Jeff. Hey, Jeff. He's asking a series of questions about what I meant when I said warm embrace by the ideology, and he's wanting some clarification. So I guess I mean the celebration of having people nod their heads and say yes when you're talking. And what I saw in graduate school, for instance, was a lot of, if you were saying the right words, the right social justice words, you were welcomed. You were right. You were on the path, and everybody agreed. And if not, you were completely cut out. there were crickets and you were likely to get called out. And so, and we see that also with, I've heard this story from a lot of people's firsthand experiences at this point, where a lonely kid who's not fitting in, doesn't have a lot of friends, starts playing the gender game and gets welcomed and is enjoying popularity and enjoying more social connection. And that's what I mean, I guess, by warmth, is that there's a call to human connection, and there's a reward that's being given. So you can, and I guess I say that all in the context of not demonizing people necessarily for falling into it, because I can understand why one would. I can understand the appeal to some people.
It's called a hug box, right? Or a love bombing.
Box?
But then once you
Yeah,
start
love
to
bombing,
wiggle
yeah.
too much, then the hug box either strangulates you or kicks you out. So there is that embrace, but it's a really narrow container. And if you
Mhm.
watch over the course of your life, if in order to keep that hug box, you have to cut out more and more of your life, that's probably a sign that this isn't actually going to develop you into your full potential.
And what you just described, that phenomenon you just described, Benjamin, that is the phenomenon that is common to all cults. And so this way of thinking that's sort of overwhelmed our institutions and our culture at the moment feels very, very cult-like to me, because it is this, as long as you're on this, you're holding these very particular narrow set of views, and you're saying the right things out loud and using the buzzwords, you're accepted. But if you deviate even slightly, people really lose their shit. It's kind of like there's been people, I can't think of an example of one, but we've all seen it, where there's somebody who really was, pretty woke, but then they deviate just slightly in their opinion about something. And they go after the person so fast. It's like, whoop, they stuck their head up, gotta, whack-a-mole, gotta conk them on the head for having a slightly different take on this. It's like no deviation is tolerated.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the appeal to, I might have said this in group on Thursday, like the appeal, you've got this woke person or whatever, and the appeal to, this is meaningful for you. Like, wow, this is really meaningful. And like trying to even get into a little bit deeper, like how specifically,
Mhm.
like, does it feel good to be like get in touch with, and like where you could share, oh, I have that, I want that kind, not maybe that been woke, but like that kind of meaning. And also, I'm wondering, I've never tried this, but I'm thinking like in these cult things, there's something about getting to be certain about something and maybe feeling less anxious because right?
Mm.
And I'm wondering if there's a way to get at, kind of having this particular worldview, does that make, does it give you some comfort, or, is it it is kind of a scary world not to know things. I could see why you might like want to have something that you really have it all figured. I don't know. I'm just wondering if there's a place to empathize on meaning and on wanting to feel certain. And if that even gets some room about, maybe I'm using this so I don't have to deal with uncertainty. So you don't necessarily have to tell them they're doing that, but I'm just wondering if even asking about it, is this relieving some anxiety? Is this,
That is such a good point, Deborah. And it does seem like that. I mean, there's this deep uncertainty that religion answers, and this is religious in that way. It's very, I can see how comforting it would be to have somebody present authority, present information with such authority that there's no questioning it. I mean, there's that creates a container that you can put faith in. And I think that could be incredibly comforting for people who are scared that life has no meaning.
Where do you all three of you derive your meaning from? And on an ideological level, do you guys have a story kind of that you exist within, like a world that's going somewhere, that you kind of you allow to organize your life in a bigger structure?
How do you feel about your death?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about your death?
How do you feel about death? Yeah. Big question.
I think you merge into bliss and oneness with God. So Yeah, I think my sort of life narrative has to do with God. And yeah, I mean, I'm, practicing within the Christian tradition, but I certainly, I have a lot of beliefs that come from different traditions. So, according to most Christians, I probably wouldn't be very, very good at it.
Well, so
being a Christian.
just to try to make that a little bit more concrete, like, so there's this transcendent being that you're in relationship with, and to what degree are you in relationship with that, or how do you think of that relationship? Like, what does that, is God watching over you? Is God teaching you, developing you, punishing you, causing you to have a purpose? There's a lot of different ways that people use the term God to actualize their beliefs.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think because I've been in different traditions, it's like one of those kaleidoscopes where you twist it and then all of a sudden you're looking at it from a different way. And so it does shift for me. Of course, my dog has to start barking.
God talk.
Dog is spelled backwards.
Good old Elliot.
I'm going to try to make him shut up. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just like this, definitely not punishing me, certainly not. Although I think there's certain like ways in which we have to be in harmony with nature, or else
we need to be corrected.
We'll suffer. And I think that's just the way things are, but I don't see it as like God punishing me. I think it's sort of guidance, but it's also just, it's like the foundation of my being. It's where I live and where I connect and where I tap into joy, which I then see kind of reflected everywhere, like in little small things, like my annoying dog and, you guys, and just even objects, like beautiful objects. I just see it everywhere. That's kind of what brings the most meaning to my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm still learning what I think in terms of religion or faith or meaning. I don't know if I'll ever know. It's a growing process for me, and I have a hard time summing it up. I go to a Christian church. I'm not really, I don't know how I feel about calling myself a Christian or not, but I get a lot of meaning out of it. And I asked my dad a long time ago what the meaning of life was, why, because we were having a conversation about this, and he said he thought that the meaning of life was to appreciate beauty. And I think I said this to you once before, but that's always stayed with me. And I have this, okay, so this is going to be a little bit weird, but you know how there's this motif, if you ever do mushrooms, or people who have done them, even if you haven't, you've seen the art, there's all the eyes, right? The eyes. This is such a common thing in psychedelic imagery. And I feel like we are the universe opening its eyes. We have the opportunity to observe things differently with our consciousness than anything else we can see. We don't see anything that has the same powers of observation that we do. So there's something to that idea in my mind about appreciating beauty and goodness being that which promotes the most beauty. And I don't mean just aesthetic, physical, superficial beauty. I mean harmony, love, happiness, high vibration, if you will, connection, relationship, and being able to bring out and witness the good and the beautiful in life and in one another. And that gives, I guess that's, but it's not an endpoint, and it's not a tight concept. It's just a fluid process, I guess. So I don't know if that is coherent at all.
So
it makes perfect sense to me.
Very fluid.
Yeah.
You make me think there's this clip that was floating around a few weeks ago. It was from a sermon or a homily from a Greek Orthodox priest, and I don't know if they have sermons or homilies, whatever the word is for the guy in front talking to the people in the pews. And he made an interesting point that stuck with me, where he said that the Catholics, they're like, okay, well, we love God, we worship God. What is God? And so they started to describe what God is or what God is not. And they had a bunch of theology around describing this thing called God. And then Martin Luther comes over and says, no, God's like this. And so he starts describing God from over here. And then the Calvinists come over here and they start describing God over here. And then you have all these different denominations in Protestant Christianity describing God. And this Greek Orthodox guy said, well, we do it a different way. We be with God, and then we allow God to show us the world. Instead of trying to see God, we be with God, and then God will show us the world. Right? So it's this inversion of theology. I think they have a word for it, but I'm not sure what that word is because it's Greek.
So it's like the others are trying to define God in human terms. And that's seems like by definition impossible to filter through our limited ability to understand and then distill it into our language. It's like it would just necessarily be reductive. It would necessarily be limited by our ability to describe. And so
and also the ability of those around you to believe. So you have smaller and smaller groups of people believing in certain dogmas rather than a broader people kind of seeing each other, God in each other, and each other in God, right? It's just kind of a different way of thinking about it. And I think a lot of what is woke can be really tied to, there's that woke is a religion, but it's definitely a Christian religion. It's a Unitarian Christian religion. And, they just kind of took the word God out of it, but it's all that Christianity, but it's that Protestant Christianity. It's that declarative propositional way of understanding and then imposing belief on the world, imposing structure on the world. And that's what they critique the world for being, always this imposition of power on everything. So what we need to do is reverse engineer that power. But there's a roof there. If all you can think of is in terms of power, there's a roof there. And that's one contention that I don't know how to articulate to atheists, but like, how do you get out of your brain? How do you get out of rationality if you don't have some place where you are surrendered to being, and then watch and see and practice your life as communication and community with being, instead of all these different systems of rationality that are just kind of floating around arguing with each other. I took your turn, Deborah, though.
Oh, that's okay. No, it's funny. I've been watching. I've gotten a little bit in a discussion. You were in it, Benjamin. I think about, is atheism the way out of this? And yeah. I was making the thing for transrational, not the irrational, but the transrational, like the mystical and all of that. But I think, several of the people there, it's just not their experience. They don't know what to do with that. But it's funny. I went from being kind of super hardcore atheist, I was going to be an astrophysicist, all this thing, to just having a series of experiences where suddenly I became a hardcore spiritual seeker. So I'd say I organized my life from like age 30 on, all about spiritual seeking, and everything else was secondary. Now I'm a little more in a materialist phase. It's like I live in New York City and I'm distracted.
Yeah. Are you willing to tell a story of the trigger that kind of woke you up or sent you in a different direction?
I'll tell you a little bit. And it eventually got me more. I've been in like Tibetan Buddhism, Judaism, Sufi, like anything that's more mystical, embodied, and in some cases, this devotional aspect to the divine, that sort of relational thing, even though I can't even say I know for sure that's really there or going on, but I decided, like, aesthetically, I prefer there to be something to be in relationship to, because I've also done straight Buddhist stuff, which would have no theology, no theistic kind of thing there. And I thought, no, that's too dry for me. So I don't want to go on too long. I also almost got a master's in divinity, because I was like, what do I do with all of this? I've spent, I'm going to synagogue and I'm not Jewish, and I'm going to, I'm doing these Tibetan rituals where, your body's eaten by the demons.
But
I'm
why?
like, what am I doing?
What happened? What happened to you to put you on the seeking path?
So, super, I'm all science, right? I think I got a little into meditation and maybe some new agey stuff around that age 29, 30, like you'd say the Saturn return, in astrology. And a couple of things happened in a row. My dad got cancer and very quickly just died. I had a series of accidents. Like I took time off before that from my job just to take a little break from my corporate career. And like once I gave myself that opening and not knowing what was happening next, like all sorts of stuff just happened, mostly very challenging, and car accidents, I was just knocked out in a certain sense. And I got to say, the Buddhists are really good on death. So I just started reading a lot of books about that view of death, dying, and just the general letting go process at all. And so that was sort of a pathway in. And then I started reading scientists who had mystical inclinations. And that was probably the biggest open the lock kind of thing for me. That I was like, oh, I didn't know that so-and-so had mystical leanings. I didn't know that. And so that gave me permission to even entertain anything outside of the mechanistic scientific worldview that we have. And so that was my big thing. Oh, we're just looking at things a certain way, like science, and maybe that's not the only way. So that was even to know there was a paradigm. like, oh, I didn't even know I'm in a framework, right? And then I was living in like the Bay Area, Marin County at that time. So there was just everything to experiment with. Like once I kind of opened things up, I must admit I had low discernment. So I was doing every crazy, thing you could imagine. I can't even, there's too many weird stories, but that was the transition. I could say how it developed as it went. I've had gurus. I've had the whole thing. And now I'm a little bit at like, where am I at with it now? But I will say, and I don't feel like I've been practicing very much, probably meditation and prayer being my primary things. It helped when I was in a community. Like I was in the Jewish community in Boulder, Colorado for a number of years. And that to have that regularity, people taking care of each other and all of that was a big deal for me. But it was a little tricky about whether I could really convert. I felt like I couldn't because I already was exposed to too many other things. I didn't feel like I could kind of pull it in, but I would say a lot of the Kabbalistic teachings are just so amazing.
So what's the uniting thread, Deborah, with all the things you've been seeking?
Yeah,
what's
all
the
the things
underlying
I've been seeking?
thread?
Well, I'd say there's some sense of there being some sense that we're in some sort of evolutionary process that is leading towards people having more and more awareness of what you're saying, like all these eyes. Like all of these eyes are kind of the eyes of the one thing we actually are. I'm pointing back here, like, where is it? Right. And could one get to the state where you recognize what's coming out of this one is that too, but you live it, like you're walking around like it's, it, and you're not feeling the sense of separation. Now, I'm realizing over time that is probably, even for some of the most evolved people, even potentially a fleeting experience. Maybe they're living it 24/7, but it's probably not, so it's sort of like this aspiration that's very difficult. But I think the big thing that shifted was I used to be working at it. Like my ego was working at it. And now I'm much more in, please do it to me.
Like a letting go.
Yeah.
Letting go of control.
Yeah, like what can you take away that's keeping me busy that I don't need to be doing? Or a lot of it's asking and then stopping trying, which can look like doing nothing and watching Netflix, which isn't really it. So that's where I'm at with it, and it's just so and just watching where I'm running into. I work a lot with shadow work, and this is where it's helpful with like. Even with wokeness, it's like if I'm hating something outside of myself, it's an opportunity for me to kind of look at, my own, where am I like that, and so maybe it's a bit of the slow polishing. I have aspirations to be open to my heart in certain ways. On the other hand, this other piece coming in is, where is it appropriate to have boundaries and say no? Where's that? You could just be surrender. Like I was thinking about how I wouldn't want to have a gun. I wouldn't ever want to be responsible for killing somebody. And I thought I would probably go, oh, just shoot me. I don't want to hurt you. But then I thought, wait a minute, maybe I should care about self-defense. Like maybe that's not actually a wise thing to just be like, sure,
No matter how close we get to, I guess, in the frame of death, we aren't dead. We're alive. And so we have responsibilities. to make money, to do some shady deals in order to get ahead. We have to use our greed, our lust, our ambition. Those weren't given to us as stumbling blocks, I don't think, to use a Christian framework. These things that we call sin are the spice of life. They're the passion. They're the fuel that get us to do things, to build things, to find, to discover. When they get out of harmony, or when they're out of order, when they go towards chaos, then they're a problem. But the problem is, like, we are responsible for our lives. We're responsible for exerting force, and because we're not, you're not supposed to lay down in front of the lion and expecting utopia to happen overnight. It's like, no, lion's over there. You got to be aware of that and be embodied.
You're
So
making
it's
me
kind of like a
think
balance.
of the Aristotelian virtues, where a dearth of this, so there's a thing, right? Whatever it is, let's say it's bravery, and a dearth of that is cowardliness, but an excess is what? Foolhardiness.
Hubris,
It's
yeah.
yeah.
Hold my beer down.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like the Darwin Awards thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'd say the other piece that motivates me is embodiment. Because I guess if I have a belief, it's like we're actually supposed to be really incarnate. If we're, you know what I mean? Like it's not about getting out of here, it's about getting in here. And much that's not an easy thing for me. I think whether it's true, I don't know, but it feels like that I'm compelled in a good way towards that.
Jennifer,
So-
you always need a prompt, don't you?
Yeah, she's full of
Sorry,
thoughts.
I get I feel like my brain is going in all these different directions. And so I apologize, but yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying, Deborah, about the whole thing about, never wanting to own a gun, and, oh, I'd rather just let someone kill me. But then, oh, wait, maybe I should care about my self-defense. But I was thinking of something that, Joseph Campbell wrote, and I can't remember the exact context, but basically that, like, to be in life, to kind of play the game and be part of all the joys and sorrows of life, you have to be able to take your own side in a tennis match. And I think that's part of it. And I think there's a lot of spiritual bypassing that we can do, where it's like, well, I'm just so evolved and so hovering on the brink of enlightenment, that, I'm not going to get down there with the rest of you guys and kind of battle it out. But I think we kind of have to some extent.
That's interesting about taking your own side. And I think people can tend to become so self-critical. I mean, I think that's really common. We see a lot of perfectionism and self-criticism and self-hate. And if you come from a standpoint of appreciating life and loving people and loving existence and admiring others, well, you're one of them too, and you're the one that you get to be closest to. So why not love yourself as well? Why not also take your own part?
Right.
And not more than necessarily, but you're the one operating this thing. So you might as well love this thing.
Exactly. And you're the one that you're most responsible for. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have your own house in order, you are going to have an adverse impact on people around you. Everybody's met someone like that, where they are just like a swirling cyclone of destruction in terms of their own life and anybody's life that they touch. They just kind of run through and wreak havoc. So how we take care of ourselves is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. And it's making me think too of, tied to this initially, I don't think, but Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a Tibetan Buddhist meditation teacher, he had the notion of idiot compassion. So there can be this way that you're just, like you just be, oh, right, like anything, right? And he's like, no, that's idiot compassion.
That's interesting. Well, this has really gone an interesting way. I always love how these conversations flow. And thanks for asking big questions, Benjamin.
That's why you brought me in, I guess.
Well, yes.
Did you want to answer that, Benjamin? I mean, I know some of the things you've been thinking because watching you on your show, but where are you at?
Well, rephrase the question.
Well, you had asked us the question about what having meaning and how are we assembling our world around. Like, where are you at? I mean, I know some of it just watching your podcast, but
yeah. Well, I guess at this point in my life, I'll be turning 47 just before somebody else on this call. And I kind of front loaded my seeking phase. I think in religious traditions, I know in Judaism, they withhold the Kabbalah until your kids are out of the house, right? Like going in the mystical direction is something for later on in life. The first part of life is establishing yourself and founding a family and getting good at the world. And then after you have all that sorted out, then you can go on your seeking thing. And I think that that's a wise way for, to direct a man's life, at least, in order for a man to be productive, and then also to attain spiritual development. I kind of front loaded that and did my seeking in my 20s. And, one thing that I could say directly about where I'm at right now is last year I did Ramadan. And at the end of Ramadan, which is just a month of fasting from sun up to sundown, at the end of it, I got this sense, usually before Ramadan, I kind of feel the loss of my direction or the loss of my ego in this way. I'm just going through the motions, and then Ramadan's a really good place to just really quiet all of that ego stuff and just quiet down and settle. And usually without seeking, because I'm even fasting from seeking, I get like a indication or some sort of gift. And last year I just had this really profound sense of the meaning of work and how the spiritual life, exactly like you were saying, Deborah, it's like God takes care of the God stuff, right? God takes care of the God stuff. If I want to prove if I'm in alignment with God, or if I'm a high person, if I'm developing in toward a noble being, that will be reflected in my work. So my work, my product is where I'm going to see myself reflected back at me. That's where I'm going to see the proof of if I'm a good person, a bad person, if I'm getting better, if I'm getting worse, And so I really, just at this point in my life, it's just about working and creating and trying to use, my platform to explore things in a way that broadens so-called discourse. I want to upload more humanity into this internet thing and see if we can make it more human and see if that humanity can spill out the other side of the screen. So that's kind of the background thing. But with regard to a grand narrative, I kind of toy around with Catholicism, but I have a problem with belief. I just have a problem with like taking God and saying, okay, this is what God is. God's 3 in 1, and Jesus died for my sins, even though I love Mary a lot. Like my heart just is really open to Mary. So hopefully someday I get something special, some sort of special realization about why I am the way I am in my belief. But I tried to put my belief in the back. And just to lead with curiosity and lead with openness, and then let's see how things kind of fall out from that.
Well, and as your work is so relational, it fits really well into that same flow, that same meaning, what you're describing, because it's really fostering connection, relationship, authenticity, and kind of I don't know, it's challenging artifice. So, yeah.
And Deborah, I had a question for you. When you were going through all these different groups, to get back to the first question, when you're going through all these different groups, did you find, or did you sense like, oh, this is kind of culty, or this is going to lead me in a constricting culty direction?
There was one I left, I can't say it was, I don't know where it was called, but two of them, when you have like a guru, right? Like there is, it's your jargon, it's your little practices, depending on who it is. Some people are thinking this is the way. I wasn't in anything where you couldn't easily get out. There was nothing, people were like, oh, okay. It's like, so it wasn't of that nature. I think the hardest thing was just leaving like a sense of community if you weren't buying it. But wait, I forgot what your question was though.
Well, because we were talking about how do you like deprogram somebody who's woke. So I'm just wondering, like, have you seen like a system of thought or a system of belief or that would lead you in that direction where you would need to get out of it, like in an ideologically fixed?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. In both cases, I was like not quite in alignment. It helped in the first situation where I had a friend, we were regularly having these qualms about certain perspectives or beliefs about whatever. And it took us a couple of years to process that because we both had really strong spiritual experiences there, like really like, wow, okay, this is what they're talking. So it's hard when you have that, but then you're like, but I think the words around this are messed up. But you're like, but this happened. So it helped having somebody else who pretty much saw the same flaws or perceived the same flaws to get to just talk through it for a long period of time. And then I haven't really thought about it in a while. So that's just not even prevalent, but it just helped to have somebody else who was like, all right, what do you think about this? And it wasn't like you couldn't ask those things anyway. It wasn't a system. The lead teacher was a bit of a tyrant, kind of. You couldn't question him, but amongst ourselves, So I think I've been in places where people could actually say things, but at a certain point, you just feel like not resonant. I'm not resonant. And I tend to be someone, no matter where I go, I'm a little off. So I'm never I'm not Jewish and I'm in a synagogue, right? It's like, I always go I'm Buddhist thing, but I believe in God. I'm always somewhere that I don't really fit.
You're open and seeking.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm open.
I'm mindful of the time for Jennifer.
Yeah, my group.
She does her group now. So
this has been fun, guys. I feel kind of blissed out. I get really blissed out with talk about God. I get into this whole state. I've been kind of meditating as we talk, and I'm just a step away from tearing off all my clothes and skipping down the road.
Okay. Now that would be great entertainment. So
all right, I'll try to ground myself.
We're still on YouTube, not the other websites. So.
Right.
It's called OnlyFans.
Not nude tube or something.
Oh my God. Well, thank you guys.
Great to hang out with you, Jen.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream.